You really think I married you because I'm naive? Sophia's voice was calm, almost too calm, as the sound of water rippled behind her. The mansion pool reflected the golden sunset. But Ethan Cole wasn't looking at the view. He was staring at the woman he thought he understood and suddenly didn't at all. Just 3 months earlier, Sophia Bennett had been invisible to him. Just another quiet pool girl working long hours under the California sun, skimming leaves, fixing tiles, never speaking unless spoken to. She wore no designer labels, drove no fancy car, and never once tried to get his attention, which, ironically, was exactly what caught it. Ethan had built his empire from nothing, a self-made billionaire who trusted numbers more than people, and especially didn't trust intentions when it came to women. So when Sophia entered his life, soft-spoken and distant, he assumed she was simple, maybe even a little lost, and when circumstances pushed them into a sudden marriage, one that outsiders whispered about and insiders questioned, Ethan convinced himself it was a controlled decision, a practical arrangement, nothing more. But what he didn't notice, not then, was how Sophia observed everything, how her silence wasn't emptiness but calculation, how her eyes followed conversations she wasn't part of, how she remembered details no one thought she'd catch. To Ethan, she was just someone who needed saving, someone who would quietly fit into the background of his already structured world. And for a while, that's exactly what she let him believe. She moved into the mansion without complaint, adapted without question, and never once demanded anything. No upgrades, no attention, no validation. It almost reassured him. Almost. Because what Ethan Cole never realized was that the people who ask for nothing are often the ones who see everything. And then she arrived. Vanessa Hart. Polished, confident, the kind of woman who knew exactly how to walk into a room and make it hers within seconds. She didn't hide her interest in Ethan, didn't pretend to be anything less than ambitious, and strangely, that made her feel more trustworthy to him. At least she was obvious. At least she played the game openly. Compared to Sophia's quiet presence, Vanessa was easy to understand, easy to predict, and dangerously easy to believe. It started with small things, casual conversations, subtle suggestions, questions planted like seeds. You don't really know her, do you? Vanessa once said with a soft smile. And just like that, doubt began to grow. Ethan started noticing what he thought were inconsistencies, moments where Sophia seemed distant, unreadable, almost like she was hiding something. But what he didn't know was that while he was beginning to question her, Sophia had already begun watching Vanessa. Not reacting, not confronting, just quietly observing, connecting pieces, waiting, because Sophia Bennett had never been the kind of woman who reacted too early. And Ethan Cole was about to learn that underestimating her wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of losing everything he thought he controlled. The moment you start believing the wrong person is the moment you lose the right one. Ethan did not hear those words out loud, but somehow they echoed in the back of his mind as he stood in his office, watching the security footage he had never bothered to review before. It had started subtly after Vanessa entered his life. A shift in attention, a shift in trust, and most dangerously, a shift in perspective. Vanessa had a way of making everything sound reasonable, almost logical, the kind of logic that did not feel like manipulation because it was wrapped in concern. She never directly accused Sophia of anything. She only asked questions, carefully chosen ones. Why did Sophia avoid certain conversations? Why did she spend time alone near the pool even late at night? Why did she seem to notice everything but say nothing? Each question planted doubt, and Ethan, who had always prided himself on being analytical, started to treat his own wife like a puzzle that needed solving instead of a person who needed understanding. Meanwhile, Sophia remained exactly the same on the surface, calm, quiet, almost distant, moving through the mansion as if she did not feel the shift at all. She still woke up early, still handled small tasks herself even though she no longer needed to, still spent time by the pool, where everything had once begun. But what Ethan could not see was that her routine had changed in ways too subtle for him to notice. The nights she spent outside were not empty moments of reflection. They were moments of observation. The angles she chose, the timing she kept, the patterns she followed, none of it was accidental. She had noticed Vanessa long before. Vanessa thought she was being noticed. She had seen the glances, the perfectly timed appearances, the way conversations seemed to conveniently happen when Ethan was most vulnerable or distracted. And instead of confronting it, Sophia chose patience. Because she understood something Ethan did not, that truth revealed too early is often ignored, but truth revealed at the right moment becomes undeniable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the mansion lights flickered on, Ethan walked into the living room and found Vanessa already there, her expression carefully composed, her tone softer than usual. She told him she was worried, that she had seen something that did not feel right, that she did not want to say anything but felt she had to. And just like that, she positioned herself as the reluctant messenger, the one who did not want conflict but could not stay silent. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening as she described moments that sounded just believable enough to be real. Moments where Sophia supposedly met someone outside, moments where her behavior did not match the image she presented. It was not evidence, not yet, but it was enough to push Ethan further into doubt. And as he stood there, processing everything, he did not realize that just outside, beyond the glass walls of the mansion, Sophia was already watching, not them, but the reflection of them in the window. She did not need to hear every word to understand what was happening. She had already anticipated this move. What mattered was not that Vanessa was lying. What mattered was how far she was willing to go. And in that moment, Sophia made a quiet decision. She would not stop this from unfolding. She would let it go further, deeper, until there was no room left for denial. Because when the truth finally came out, it would not just clear her name. It would change everything Ethan thought he knew about her, about Vanessa, and most importantly, about himself. Sometimes the truth does not hide, it waits. The next morning felt different, even though nothing visible had changed inside the mansion. But Ethan could feel it, a quiet tension sitting beneath every interaction, every glance, every silence. He found himself watching Sophia more closely now, noticing things he had ignored before, the way she paused before answering simple questions, the way her eyes lingered just a second longer than necessary, the way she seemed completely unbothered by the distance growing between them. That calmness no longer reassured him, it unsettled him. Because in his world, people reacted when something was wrong, they defended themselves, they explained, they tried to fix things. Sophia did none of that. She simply existed as if the storm around her did not matter. And that, more than anything Vanessa had said, began to feel suspicious. Later that afternoon, Vanessa arrived again, not invited but never unwelcome, carrying the same composed confidence that made everything she said feel intentional. She had not pushed too hard this time. She did not need to. Instead, she created space for Ethan's own doubts to grow, asking fewer questions and letting his silence fill in the answers. She suggested that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones with the most to hide, that appearances can be deceiving, and that trust should be earned, not assumed. Ethan did not respond immediately, but his expression said enough. Meanwhile, Sophia continued her routine, but behind that routine, everything was aligning exactly as she had planned. She had already mapped out the timing of Vanessa's visits, the patterns of Ethan's reactions, and the moments when both of them were most vulnerable to influence. She had also noticed something else, something Vanessa did not realize she had revealed. There was always a moment, brief but consistent, when Vanessa checked her phone after certain conversations, as if confirming something or reporting something. It was small, almost invisible, but to Sophia, it was everything. That night, while the mansion slept, Sophia returned to the pool area, the same place where her story with Ethan had begun, but now it served a different purpose. She adjusted a small device hidden within the outdoor lighting, something simple, something Ethan would never think to look for because he never imagined she would have the knowledge to set it up. But Sophia had never been what he assumed. She had spent years learning to observe, to adapt, to understand systems and people in ways that did not require attention. And now, She was using all of it. Days passed, and the tension grew thicker. Ethan became more distant, his conversations shorter, his trust slipping quietly but steadily. Vanessa, on the other hand, became more present, more involved, stepping into spaces Sophia once occupied without resistance. It was almost seamless, almost too perfect, and that was exactly what Sophia needed. Because perfection, when pushed far enough, always cracks. The moment came during a small gathering at the mansion. Nothing extravagant, just a few business associates and familiar faces, but enough people to create the kind of environment where truth could not easily be ignored. Vanessa moved through the room with confidence, positioning herself close to Ethan, speaking in low tones that suggested intimacy without ever crossing a line. Sophia stayed in the background, as expected, unnoticed by most, underestimated by all. But behind that stillness, everything was in motion. Because what no one realized was that every word spoken that night, every carefully crafted lie, every subtle manipulation was no longer just being heard. It was being captured, and Sophia was not waiting anymore. She was preparing to choose the exact moment when everything would change, not just for Vanessa, not just for Ethan, but for the version of herself they both believed in. And when that moment arrived, there would be no confusion, no doubt, and no way to go back to the illusion they had been living in. The most dangerous moment is not when a lie is told, but when it is almost believed. The gathering continued under soft lighting and quiet music, but beneath the calm surface, everything was shifting in ways no one else could see. Ethan stood near the center of the room, engaged in conversation, yet his attention drifted more often than he realized, pulled subtly toward Vanessa's voice, her presence, her carefully timed smiles. She had mastered the rhythm of influence, never pushing too hard, never demanding, only guiding. Each word she spoke felt casual, but every sentence had a direction. Every glance had a purpose. She spoke about trust, about loyalty, about how success often attracts the wrong kind of people. And though she never mentioned Sophia directly, the implication lingered in the air like a quiet suggestion that refused to disappear. Ethan listened, not fully agreeing, not fully resisting, caught in that uncertain space where doubt begins to feel like intuition. Across the room, Sophia stood near the edge of the glass wall, her reflection blending with the night outside. She appeared detached, almost as if she did not belong to the scene unfolding around her, but her eyes moved with precision, tracking every interaction, every shift in tone, every subtle change in Ethan's expression. She noticed the way his posture leaned slightly toward Vanessa now, the way his responses came quicker, the way hesitation had started to replace certainty when he looked in her direction. None of it surprised her. In fact, it confirmed everything she had been preparing for. The device hidden within the lighting near the pool was active, capturing more than just sound, capturing context, timing, intention. But Sophia knew that evidence alone was never enough. People did not change their beliefs because of facts alone. They changed when those facts disrupted something they felt was true. And Ethan still believed he was in control. That belief needed to break. As the evening moved forward, Vanessa made her next move, subtle but deliberate. She guided a conversation toward financial decisions, speaking about risk, about hidden liabilities, about how even the strongest foundations can be weakened by the wrong partnership. This time, her words carried a sharper edge, a clearer direction. And for the first time, she allowed a slight pause after mentioning trust, just enough space for Ethan to connect the thought himself. And he did. His expression tightened, not with anger, but with something more dangerous, quiet suspicion. It was exactly what she wanted. But what Vanessa did not realize was that she had crossed a line Sophia had been waiting for. Because this was no longer just about perception, it was about influence over decisions that mattered. And that changed everything. Sophia stepped away from the glass, moving slowly through the room, not drawing attention, not interrupting, just repositioning herself closer to where Ethan and Vanessa stood. She did not speak, not yet, because timing was still everything. She could feel it building, the tension, The imbalance, the moment where everything would tip. And then it happened. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her voice lowering just enough to create the illusion of privacy, but not enough to escape what was being recorded. She suggested that some people enter lives not by accident, but by design, that sometimes simplicity is the most convincing disguise. It was a statement meant to sound thoughtful, but it carried a direct accusation beneath it. Ethan did not respond immediately, but the silence that followed was louder than any answer. And in that silence, something shifted. Because for the first time, Sophia saw it clearly, not doubt, not confusion, but belief beginning to form in the wrong direction. And that was the moment she had been waiting for. Not when the lie was told, but when it was about to be accepted. Her expression did not change. Her movements remained calm. But inside, the final piece had fallen into place. The truth was ready. And very soon, it would not just be seen, it would be undeniable. If you're going to believe something about me, at least make sure it is true. Sophia's voice finally broke through the quiet tension. Not loud, not aggressive, but clear enough to shift every attention in the room toward her. The conversation around Ethan and Vanessa paused instantly, as if the air itself had tightened, waiting for what would come next. Ethan turned to look at her, and for a brief second, something unfamiliar crossed his face. Not irritation, not confidence, but uncertainty. Because Sophia had never interrupted before. She had never stepped into the center of anything. And now she was standing there, calm, composed, and completely unshaken by the weight of every assumption that had been building against her. Vanessa's expression remained controlled, but there was a flicker, small and quick, something that betrayed the first hint of discomfort. She had not expected this, not now, not like this. Sophia took another step forward, her gaze steady, not challenging, not defensive, just certain. She did not look at Vanessa first. She looked at Ethan, and that choice alone shifted the entire dynamic. "You have been listening carefully," she said, her tone even, "but you have not been paying attention." The words landed softly, but their meaning carried weight. Ethan frowned slightly, instinctively resisting, but he did not interrupt. Something in her voice held him there, forced him to stay present. Around them, the room had gone quiet, conversations fading into the background as attention gathered around the unfolding moment. Sophia did not rush. She allowed the silence to stretch just enough to make every next word matter. "You think I do not see what is happening," she continued, "but I have seen it from the beginning." Now she turned her eyes to Vanessa, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a calm clarity that felt far more unsettling. "The timing of your visits, the conversations you choose, the questions you ask, none of it is random." Vanessa let out a small, controlled breath, her lips forming a faint smile as if to dismiss the statement, but she did not speak immediately. Because for the first time, she was no longer leading the conversation. Sophia was. Ethan's attention shifted between them, his thoughts trying to catch up with a situation that was no longer following the pattern he understood. "You said I was quiet," Sophia continued, her voice steady. "And you are right. I am. But quiet does not mean unaware." She reached into the small bag she carried, not in a dramatic gesture, but in a simple, deliberate movement, and placed her phone on the table beside them. The action itself seemed ordinary, but the timing made it feel significant. Ethan glanced at it, confusion deepening, while Vanessa's posture adjusted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tension replacing her earlier ease. "You have been asking questions," Sophia said, looking back at Ethan. "So, I thought it was time you heard the answers." She tapped the screen once, not pressing play yet, not revealing anything too soon, because this was not just about showing the truth. It was about making sure it could not be ignored. "But before that," she added, her tone softening just slightly, "you should ask yourself one thing." Ethan's eyes met hers, drawn in despite himself. "Who benefits from what you are about to believe?" The question lingered, simple, direct, impossible to dismiss. And for the first time since Vanessa had entered his life, Ethan hesitated in a different way, not questioning Sophia, but questioning the direction his thoughts had been pushed. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, to regain control, but Sophia pressed play before she could speak. And in that exact moment, the balance of power shifted completely, because what was about to be heard was not an explanation, not an argument, but something far more dangerous. It was proof. And once it began, there would be no way to stop it. The truth does not need to be loud when it is undeniable. The soft sound of the recording began to play, almost too quiet at first, forcing everyone nearby to lean in, to listen more closely, and in that small act of attention, the control Vanessa once held began to slip away. The voice that came through was clear, unmistakable, and far more revealing than anyone had expected. It was Vanessa, not the polished version she presented in public, not the careful tone she used with Ethan, but something else entirely, something unfiltered. She was speaking on the phone, her words precise, calculated, and completely different from the concern she had performed just moments ago. She spoke about timing, about patience, about how trust is not taken but redirected. She mentioned Ethan by name, not with admiration, but with strategy, describing his habits, his decision patterns, his tendency to rely on logic while underestimating emotional influence. Each sentence peeled back another layer, exposing intentions that had never been meant to be heard. The room remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer passive. It was heavy, focused, unavoidable. Ethan's expression shifted slowly, not in one dramatic reaction, but in stages, confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief giving way to recognition. Because the voice he was hearing did not match the person he thought he knew. Vanessa's posture stiffened, her confidence cracking just enough to reveal the tension beneath. She opened her mouth, as if to interrupt, to explain, to reshape what was being heard, but the recording continued, and this time, there was no space left to redirect it. The second part revealed even more. Conversations about access, about influence, about positioning herself as the only trustworthy voice in Ethan's life. She spoke about Sophia too, not with fear, but with dismissal, describing her as predictable, quiet, easy to replace in his perception. That was her assumption. That was her mistake. Sophia stood still, her expression unchanged, not watching Vanessa, not reacting to the content of the recording, but watching Ethan. Because this moment was never about proving Vanessa wrong. It was about forcing Ethan to see clearly. The final part of the recording played, and this time, the tone shifted again, revealing the end goal, the reason behind everything. Vanessa spoke about control, not in obvious terms, but in implications, about guiding decisions, about being close enough to influence outcomes that mattered. It was not exaggerated, it was not dramatic, it was real, and that made it far more powerful. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke, no one moved, because there was nothing left to question. Ethan looked at the phone, then slowly lifted his gaze to Vanessa, but the look in his eyes was no longer uncertain. It was clear, not angry, not explosive, but clear in a way that carried far more weight. Vanessa tried to recover, her voice steadying as she began to speak, suggesting context, misunderstanding, anything that could reshape what had just been revealed. But the difference now was that her words no longer carried the same influence. Because once doubt is replaced with clarity, it cannot easily return. Sophia finally spoke again, her tone unchanged, calm, controlled, and final. "You said I was quiet," she repeated softly, "and you were right." She paused, allowing the moment to settle completely. "But you were wrong about everything else." And in that moment, it was no longer about who had been believed before. It was about who could be believed now. And for the first time since this began, the answer was undeniable. The hardest truth to accept is not that you were lied to, but that you chose to believe it. The silence after the recording did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like a weight pressing down on every person in the room, forcing them to process what they had just heard. Ethan did not speak immediately. His eyes remained on Vanessa, but the way he looked at her had completely changed. There was no curiosity left, no openness, no room for explanation. What remained was clarity, and behind that clarity, something deeper, the realization that every moment of doubt he had directed at Sophia had been misplaced. Vanessa took a small step forward, her voice steady but noticeably more controlled than before, as she attempted to reframe everything, suggesting that the recording lacked context, that conversations could be misinterpreted, that intentions were not always what they seemed. She spoke carefully, choosing words that once would have guided Ethan back into uncertainty. But now, those same words sounded different, thinner, less convincing, as if the structure behind them had already collapsed. Ethan listened, but this time he did not absorb. He evaluated, and the difference was immediate. Across from them, Sophia remained still, not interrupting, not reinforcing what had already been proven, because she understood something Vanessa did not. Once truth is seen clearly, it does not need to be defended. It stands on its own. The room, once filled with quiet conversations and soft movement, now felt like a space where everything had paused, every guest aware that they were witnessing something that could not be undone. Ethan finally shifted his gaze away from Vanessa and looked at Sophia. And in that moment, the distance he had created between them became impossible to ignore. It was not just physical, it was built from assumptions, from doubt, from every time he had chosen to question her instead of understand her. "Why did you not say anything sooner?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, not demanding, not defensive, but searching for something he could hold on to. Sophia met his eyes, her expression calm, but there was something different now, something that had not been there before. Not anger, not sadness, but a quiet finality. "Because you were not ready to listen," she said simply. The answer landed without resistance, because deep down, Ethan knew it was true. If she had spoken earlier, he would have questioned her. He would have analyzed her words the same way he had analyzed everything else, looking for flaws instead of truth. Vanessa's presence had not created the problem. It had revealed it, and that realization settled heavily. Vanessa tried one last time, her voice softer now, almost careful, suggesting that people make mistakes, that misunderstandings happen, that everything could still be clarified. But the difference now was not just in what she said, it was in how it was received. Ethan did not respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had already heard enough. His silence was no longer uncertainty. It was decision. Sophia glanced around the room briefly, taking in the quiet attention, the shifted energy, the way every person present had already formed their own understanding of what had happened. Then she looked back at Ethan, not with expectation, not waiting for an apology, not asking for anything at all. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. Because for the first time, he realized that whatever came next would not be something he could control. The balance had shifted, not just between truth and lies, but between who held the power to stay and who had the strength to leave. And as that realization settled in, Ethan understood something he had not allowed himself to consider before. Losing trust is one thing, but losing the person who gave it to you without asking for anything in return is something else entirely. And in that moment, he was no longer sure which one he had. Just lost. Not every ending is loud. Some in the moment you realize you deserve more. The room had not fully recovered from what had just unfolded, but something irreversible had already taken place, something deeper than embarrassment or exposure, something that shifted the foundation of every relationship standing in that space. Ethan remained still, but his thoughts were moving faster than ever, replaying moments he had overlooked, words he had misinterpreted, decisions he had made with confidence that now felt misplaced. He looked at Sophia again, but this time he was not searching for answers. He was recognizing what had always been there, the consistency, the restraint, the quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness. Vanessa, on the other hand, had lost something far more critical than composure. She had lost influence, and without it, everything she said now felt like an attempt rather than a truth. She stepped back slightly, her posture no longer as certain, her presence no longer commanding attention the way it had before. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Sophia did not acknowledge her again. For Sophia, that part of the story was already over. Instead, she reached for her phone, turned off the recording, and slipped it back in her bag with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no visible sense of victory, only a quiet sense of completion. Ethan finally took a step forward, closing a distance that now felt much larger than a few feet. "Sophia," he said, her name carrying more weight now than it ever had before. But he stopped there, as if unsure how to continue. Because words, for the first time in his life, did not come easily. He had built his world on clarity, on control, on decisions made with confidence. But this moment was different. This required something he had not practiced: vulnerability. Sophia turned to face him fully, her expression steady. But there was a boundary there now, invisible but unmistakable. "You believed her," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Ethan nodded slightly, not because he wanted to admit it, but because denying it would only make it worse. "I did," he answered quietly. The honesty was real, but it came late, and both of them knew it. Another silence settled between them, but this one was different from the others. It was not filled with tension or confusion. It was filled with understanding, the kind that does not require explanation, because everything that needed to be seen had already been revealed. Around them, the guests began to shift, some stepping away, others pretending to return to their conversations. But the atmosphere had changed too much to return to what it had been. The night, in many ways, was already over. Sophia glanced briefly toward the pool, the place where everything had started, and then back at Ethan. "I did not marry you because I needed anything," she said calmly. "And I did not stay because I had to." Ethan felt the weight of those words immediately, because they removed every assumption he had built his understanding on. She had not been dependent. She had not been unaware. She had chosen to be there. And now, she was choosing something else. "Sophia," he said again, this time with more urgency. But she gently shook her head before he could continue. Not dismissing him, not rejecting him, but stopping the moment from becoming something it was not ready to be. Because what he was about to say, whatever it was, belonged to a different time, a time before everything had changed. And that time no longer existed. She took a small step back, creating space, not just physically but emotionally, redefining the distance between them in a way that words could not undo. Ethan did not move this time, because for the first time, he understood that moving too quickly, speaking too soon, could break something that was already fragile. And as he stood there, watching her, he realized something he had never considered before. Winning someone's trust is not the same as deserving it. And right now, he was no longer sure he deserved hers. Sometimes the person you underestimated becomes the lesson you never forget. The night had quietly unraveled into something none of them had expected, and as the last traces of conversation faded into distant murmurs, Sophia turned toward the exit of the mansion without hesitation. There was no dramatic pause, no final glance meant to invite a reaction, only a calm decision carried out with the same quiet certainty she had shown from the beginning. The sound of her heels against the polished floor echoed softly, each step creating a distance that felt heavier than any words left unspoken. Ethan watched her go, not because he did not know what to say, but because he finally understood that saying something now would not be enough. For the first time in his life, control had slipped through his hands, not because someone took it from him, but because he had given it away without realizing it. He had trusted the wrong voice, questioned the wrong person, and built his conclusions on assumptions that now stood exposed. And the cost of that mistake was walking away from him one step at a time. Sophia reached the doorway and paused, not to look back, but to take in a quiet breath, as if marking the end of something that had once mattered. Outside, the night air felt different, lighter, untouched by the tension that still lingered inside. She stepped forward, leaving behind the mansion, the expectations, and the version of herself that had allowed others to define her. Inside, Ethan finally moved, taking a step forward, then another, but he stopped before reaching the door. Because something held him back, not doubt, not pride, but the realization that chasing her in that moment would only be about easing his own regret, not respecting her decision. And for the first time, he chose not to act on impulse. Instead, he stood there, watching the space she had just left, understanding that if there was ever a chance to repair what he had broken, it would not begin with words spoken too late, but with actions that proved something different. Across the room, Vanessa was no longer the center of anything. She had already faded into the background, her presence reduced to something insignificant in the wake of everything that had been revealed. No one was looking at her anymore. No one was listening because the influence she once held had disappeared the moment the truth replaced illusion. But even that no longer mattered to Ethan. His focus had shifted completely. The mansion, once a symbol of control and certainty, now felt unfamiliar, almost empty in a way that had nothing to do with space and everything to do with absence. He turned his gaze toward the pool, the reflection of the water catching the dim lights, reminding him of where it had all started, of the version of Sophia he thought he understood, and the reality he had failed to see. And in that reflection, he saw something else, not her, but himself, and the mistake he could not undo. Outside, Sophia walked toward the quiet street, her pace steady, her expression calm, but her thoughts moving with clarity. She had not planned for how this would end, only for how the truth would be revealed. And now that it had, everything else was a choice. She did not feel anger. She did not feel regret. Only a quiet understanding that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away without looking back. But as she reached the edge of the property, she slowed slightly, not stopping, just enough to let a single thought surface. Not about what had happened, but about what might come next. Because some endings are not final. Some are simply the moment before everything begins again, just in a way no one expected.